Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator, and I'm taking a look at a new channel today, one that I haven't responded to before, and this channel has actually been popping off recently. Like they had, this is a Christian channel. It's called Daily Dose of Wisdom, and they've kind of been getting some good views lately, blowing up a little bit. Like they had a video 6 days ago that is at about 250,000 views. So I'm gonna read the description for this channel because I want to try and approach this from a good faith perspective. So, hello there. My name is Brandon McGuire, and I started this channel because it became clear to me that God is real. If that sounds wild or ridiculous to you, then you are just the kind of person I'd love to connect with. Is this a Tinder ad? I genuinely think that we've all faced doubt or even anger towards God that we have insisted is unbelief at one level or another. Okay? But here's my story. Jesus has saved me and changed everything for me. And so I want to help people understand who he is so that he can do the same for them, capital H-E. So I'm interacting with content from across the internet and engaging in conversations that I think are important from a Jesus perspective. Skeptics and seekers are welcome. So we like that. Conversations are good. Questions are good. Good is capitalized for some reason. No hate, just love. Hate and love are capitalized. Not sure why. The fear of the Lord, all caps, is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, Brandon. Well, let's see what you have to say. So this video is called why how Christianity is different from every other religion. So this should be a spicy one, I think.
Literally beg you to listen to this video at least until the point where John Lennox gives his analogy about his wife and cooking, because it is one of the best analogies I've ever heard in explaining the difference between Christianity and every other religion. Let's go ahead and dive in.
In a society where we have access to many religions, how do we decide which one to follow?
Well, I only know one way of deciding which of anything to believe is on the basis of evidence. You see, there's a confusion about faith. Many people have accepted Dawkins' definition of faith as believing where there's no evidence. That's nonsense. Faith is an ordinary word. It's not just a religious word. It's an ordinary word. It means trust. And usually, I suspect that all of you don't trust either facts or people without having evidence, or else you're a bit silly. And your bank manager won't trust you with a loan unless you provide evidence of collateral. Isn't that true? We all know what evidence-based faith is, but somehow the word has been spread around by Dawkins and co. that faith is a vice because it's believing where there's no evidence. That's nonsense. That is blind faith, and it's very dangerous.
Okay, so words can have multiple meanings, first off, and you're conflating the colloquial meaning or the dictionary definition of faith with the religious context of the word. So there are usages of words that are colloquial or are academic and that are scientific, like theory is a good one. And there are examples of words that are defined in one way in everyday speech and a different way in a religious context. But you're actually conflating the two definitions, because if you look on YouTube, Google, maybe YouTube, and just look up the definition of faith, it'll provide a basic definition and then a definition in a religious context. And the definition in the religious context says having a belief in something based on a spiritual apprehension. So that means basically believing in a higher power because of a spiritual apprehension, which is basically like I had a run-in with Jesus. I had an experience with Jesus, which is exactly what the guy who made this channel, that's exactly what Brandon said happened to him. So that's why he has faith. The entire point of faith is that you're believing something sight unseen. But Christians know that that sounds bad. So they have to make this conflation.
It's the kind of faith that causes young men to fly planes into tall buildings. That's
Or to carry out the Inquisition, or to burn crosses, or to do any number of terroristic acts that are backed up by their religion. Like, why are we singling out Islam here? That was such a pivot. Like, that was such a pivot. Talk about an emotional appeal to make your argument. I mean, really? You just went for the 9/11. I feel like there should be not a Godwin's law, but a version of Godwin's law for invoking 9/11 in arguments that you just automatically lose. It's like Lois Griffin on Family Guy when she runs for mayor. Like 9/11. Peter. Peter. Losh.
blind faith. Christianity is evidence-based.
Peter, I'm holding iced tea.
Listen to this. John, at the end of his gospel, he says, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written, that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. In other words, here's the evidence on which faith is based. Now,
So the evidence is the fact that it's written in a book. If I can quote Professor Dave, some book says a thing.
how do you decide between religions? Well, there are several ways. Very briefly,
Really quick, before he gets into this, I think it's interesting that, because I'm putting myself in the mindset of the maybe more skeptical viewer of this video, and I know that there's going to be this complaint, well, that's John, who is in this book called the Bible, so he's biased and illegitimate for that reason. But it's interesting to note that John, when he wrote that, didn't even know that there was going to be this, canonized thing called the Bible that was going to be included with all of these other books and sort of put together in the way that it is today. He's just a real person who experienced real events in history and is proclaiming the reality of those events to the original audience. And I just think that's interesting I think sometimes we can put the cart before the horse in terms of quickly discrediting a eyewitness to events in history. So that being said, let's let him continue.
just
Okay, I mean, first off, you're just saying that. So you saying that does not add any legitimacy to it or make that evidence or change the definition of faith. But let's say he is giving a eyewitness perspective. How is his perspective different from a modern perspective? Do you think there's anything that might have been misinterpreted in that long of a time period passing to where they might describe something today that we know the real definition of and the real cause of? That maybe they had some archaic beliefs back then in the Bronze Age? Just saying.
think of the three major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. When it comes to Christ, my Jewish friends, and I have many of them, believe that Christ died and did not rise. I, as a Christian, believe he died and rose. My Muslim friends believe he didn't die. Those three things cannot be simultaneously true. And therefore, I simply invite people to investigate the evidence. And one of the most seminal experiences in my life was sitting on the ground in the bright sunshine in Trinity College, Cambridge, listening to one of the world's top lawyers, actually an expert in Islamic law, but a Christian. And he was a Queen's Counsel, amongst many other things. Sir Norman Anderson, I think his book is still obtainable. And he got up and says, I want to do a forensic investigation of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And the place was absolutely packed, and I'll never forget it, because that was the beginnings of understanding that there is a rational forensic defense.
No, it is not. That's literally just one person saying that I want to perform a forensic investigation of the resurrection. That's not, so what? you can't claim that that's the start of the investigation happening, because has that actually happened? I don't think so. How many groups of people have said that they're going to, oh, we're going to investigate what really happened with Jesus or investigate the Bible stories? It's always some Christian propaganda that's just promoting some movie like The Passion of the Christ, where a guy gets tortured for an hour, and it's kind of like gay porn almost.
Of this. And we have to make up our own minds. But there's another method of approach, and it's this. You see, of every worldview and religion, I ask several questions. And when it comes to religions, I ask, what is the shape of the religion? How is relationship with God determined? So let's just confine ourselves, for sake of illustration, to God-fearing religions, not religions that don't really believe in God and so on, but God-fearing religions like the three I've mentioned. And what I discover by constant questioning of people is that there's a general pattern, that there's some sort of initiation rite, perhaps performed on a child, perhaps performed on an adult, and the person is on the way. And the descriptor, the way, is often used, and I often draw this, and I draw a little door, you get in, and a wavy line. This is the way it goes up and down. And then there's a gate, another big door at the far end, and I draw the scales of justice there. And at the other side of that gate is nirvana, heaven, what have you, paradise. And I say, as you're on the way, you have various people that teach you and help you and so on. But even they cannot guarantee your acceptance into heaven or whatever at the end. Why? Because you have to go through the final assessment, a judgment. And why is that? Because the principle of the religion is merit. And so you have to hope that with all the teaching you've got and all the experience, that your good deeds will outweigh your bad deeds.
No, that's not true. I mean, for Christianity at least, the most important thing is that you believe in Jesus and that you're saved. And there's a whole group of Christians who will argue against works-based faith and saying that your works are what get you to heaven, when it's the fact that you're saved by Jesus, and there's nothing you could physically do that would make you worthy of going to heaven, because we're all, sinners, and we're all terrible, and we're all born broken. So the only thing that will get you to heaven is that I'm saved by Jesus. But you can't conflate the notion of nirvana with the Christian version of heaven. They're not compatible. They're just and if there is a pattern between these religions, why do you think that is? Maybe it's because humans tend to have similar beliefs, and also because Christianity ripped off a bunch of other religions like Zoroastrianism and paganism and all these other religions that came previous, because the Bible and Christianity are not the earliest religion, not by a long shot. I believe that would be Hinduism.
You'll be accepted. And I find that by and large, most people say that's exactly what we believe. And I say it's exactly not what I believe. And they say, of course you do. You're a Christian. You believe, as well as I do, that good works are important. Yes, I say, I believe they're important, but they're not the basis of acceptance. And they say, but how can that possibly be? Well, I say, you think of that wavy line, and you're on that wavy line.
I like how the camera is just centered on this guy's crotch. I mean, am I the only one who's noticing that?
And you cannot, by definition, be sure of acceptance. It's like Birmingham University. You get in, you do your A-levels, wonderful, you're in, and then there are nice professors like me teaching you. But I can't guarantee you get a degree. Why? Because you have to get through finals. That's the day of judgment, folks, isn't it? And many of you remember it. And that is what the vast majority of people think a religion is. And then I drop a little bomb into their minds. And I say, but that isn't Christianity, folks. In religion, acceptance comes at the end on the basis of an assessment of merit.
Because Christians are so accepting, right? There's nothing that Christians will categorize someone as and say, I don't accept you into my family or into my church based on this thing, usually something that's fundamental to their existence, like skin color or sexual orientation. But Christians are so accepting, right? Okay, yeah, Christianity is like, not like all the other girls. Christianity is different, okay.
Well, if that's religion, Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship. And acceptance comes at the beginning.
Wow, he really looks like an evil movie villain right there, didn't he? Like, acceptance, it comes at the beginning. You'll all see. They all laughed at me. They all laughed when I said Christianity was different. Well, they won't be laughing now.
It's radical. And you know, I believe in our country and in my original country, many people have rejected Christianity. Why? Because they've never understood this. They don't realize that Christianity is not a merit-based religion. Because Christ came into our world and he told us that if we listened to him and accepted his word and believed on him as the Savior, the Son of God, we would have in that moment eternal life and we would not come into judgment. That's utterly radical. So the acceptance comes at the beginning. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I don't give lectures like this and discussions like this to earn God's forgiveness. I do them because I got it. That's radical. And you.
Well, this is just the argument against once saved, always saved, is that what is stopping you from just living a horrible life and being a complete dick to everyone and still getting into heaven as equally as somebody who never harmed a person and gave to charity their whole life? It was just generally awesome and didn't eat the last slice of pizza. Like a perfect example, look at Kent Hovind and people asking him about Jeffrey Dahmer, because Jeffrey Dahmer literally, I think, discovered, it might have been Kent Hovind's videos, it probably was, but in jail he discovered anti-evolution propaganda and, you know, realized that evolution was wrong and found Jesus. And Kent says that Jeffrey Dahmer will get into heaven, even though he did some pretty heinous things. You know, I mean, he tried to create sex zombies by drilling into their heads. I mean, he, I don't need to go into what he did, but it was pretty bad. And personally, I would not want, if my idea of heaven would be somewhere where Jeffrey Dahmer is not there. I don't even want to be in the same realm of existence as him. I would prefer not to, if I could choose it, because isn't heaven supposed to be paradise based on your own sense of paradise, which doesn't even make sense if you have multiple people living in heaven, right? But that's a whole nother thing.
You all understand that. Let me ram this in with a little illustration. Can I do that? Only take a minute.
Hey, as long as you ask for consent first, I mean, and buy me dinner.
And then
Wait, this is it then.
yeah.
You've heard about my wife.
Cut him off.
Well, over 50 years ago, I saw this vision in Cambridge. So I decided I'd like to marry her. So I came to her one day and
That is good. Somebody that is really good. I'm gonna have to point that out to Kent sometimes that Jeffrey Dahmer was gay. He used to troll gay bars for victims. He was super gay. But I think Kent would say, "Oh, gay people, they can get saved. They just have to give up their horrible homosexual lifestyle of having sex with men and getting feces on their dick." Okay, we have a super chat from Thinking Monkey for £5. It says, "Hi AJ, finally caught a live show. Keep up the great work." Well, I will.
I had a little
Thank you.
present wrapped up for her. It was a cookbook. So I said, "I'd like to marry you, Sally." Now, the condition would be this. Let's look at page 147. It's apple cake. And here are the laws for making apple cake. Thou shalt take so much flour, thou shalt take so much sugar, and there you are. Now, here's the way it's going to be. If you keep these laws for the next 40 years, I'll think about accepting you.
He's quite villainous, isn't he? I mean, this screenshot. I mean, would you marry this guy? If you keep these laws for the next 40 years, I'll let you out of the basement 1 hour a day.
If you don't, you can go back to your mother. But look, why are you laughing? That is
I think they're laughing out of discomfort because it's an uncomfortable situation because what you just said was a little bit rude and possibly even classist.
what many
It's like Drake saying, don't make me give you back to the hood.
of you sitting here think about God. And you would never insult a fellow human being by basing a relationship on merit. You wouldn't. And so my marriage has been good. Why? Because my wife is not cooking in order to gain my acceptance. She likes cooking because she's got it. And the wonderful thing about Christianity is precisely that. It's not religion in that sense. It's a relationship.
It's that sense of acknowledgement of our need for God, of our own moral depravity, of the fact that we are not holy in and of ourselves as He is. He is perfect and perfectly holy, and He wants to have relationship with us. How do you square that circle? How can God relate to and unite Himself to a species that is unsuitable for Him based on?
I mean, I don't really think you can. I mean, how can a perfect being create anything that is imperfect? That doesn't really make sense. Why would like an almighty deity on the scale of universe creation care about one of the species living on one of the planets in one galaxy in one solar system, when we're not even the most impressive planet in our solar system? Like, good question. It makes sense that he wouldn't. I mean, to me, I think it makes a lot more sense that we are just an incidental offshoot of chemical and physical processes that have been happening on the scale of billions of years that resulted in the conditions where we have a planet that's close enough to a star, but not too close enough, but not too close to where liquid water can exist, where molecules and chemistry can happen in oceans over and over again for a long period of time and eventually create a simple form of life that is able to survive and evolve, and tons of this life dies off and a small fraction of it survives, but by some lucky chance we're able to exist. Now, such a fragile needle edge existence would probably tell you that we should take care of the planet we have and worry about the environment, because we could lose it very easily since so many other organisms and species have gone extinct on this planet. But usually it's Christians who deny climate change. So,
based on the way that we have exercised our own free will and fallen, and the way that collectively and individualistically, every single person has fallen short of the glory of God, and yet God still wants us. The scriptures are riddled with this. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. We were his enemies, and he came for us. That we were orphans that he adopted, etc., etc. He made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. It is literally littered throughout the entire New Testament. This idea that we have radically fallen short, that we're desperately in need. At the same time, we're desperately, deeply loved by God in spite of that, in spite of the fact that we're rebelling against him constantly, and that he's made a way, that his, like he said, it's not merit-based, because if it were, no one would ever be with God. We cannot reach to the heights of what is necessary to become suitable creatures for him. Only through that beautiful atonement that took place on the cross, only through God himself heroically living the life that we couldn't live, dying the death that we deserved to die, absorbing the wrath that was towards our sin.
So if it not had been for the Romans torturing somebody to death, where they had already tortured a bunch of other men to death using the same method, but was it something about crucifixion specifically? I mean, what if they had just held Jesus' head under a pail of water and drowned him? Would it have counted? Or was it the fact that he suffered? I'm Jesus. If Jesus was a deity, this is like a 10,000 level IQ argument that I like to make. If Jesus was actually a deity, if Jesus was God, then there's a chance that he felt literally no pain while he was on the cross. Or that he could have, in his perspective, had it go by in less than an instant. So did he really suffer? I mean, if you were God, why would you? And can a God even feel pain the same way that a human does? Because you say he was a God and a man. I mean, that to me, that just doesn't really work. Because you either have if you have the magic powers, to me, there's no way that somebody could have magic powers within themselves and get to a level of torture that extreme. If you're saying he felt pain the same way any human does, there's no way that you wouldn't tap into that like a Super Saiyan Goku and just, like Hulk Jesus off the cross. And, fuck you guys. Like, there's no way. So is that the big sacrifice, that he let himself be tortured to death slowly? Why is that like meritorious? That's virtuous, to allow yourself to be tortured and like poked with a stick. Get him, hold on. That doesn't seem like, what's so great about that? It just seems kind of barbaric and vicious. It was just a sign of the really archaic way that people were punished back then. To me, I don't see any greater meaning in it. Yeah, Jesus had a bad weekend. and yeah, he died, but he didn't really die. He came back to life, right? How does that not undo him dying?
And then conquering death and rising again, only if that is true is there hope for humanity. There is no other possible system or worldview or ideology or way that can square the circle of the fundamental problem of the holiness of God and the depravity of man. It is
Try using lube.
only on that old rugged cross that the solution has been offered that is actually legitimate. No other.
That old cross, that old rugged cross, that old 2x4 that I was nailed to. Hold it.
Claimant in religion, in any other religion, whether it's Buddha, Muhammad, etc. No one else is offering us the solution to the problem that we have. No one else has actually even claimed to do this thing that Jesus has claimed to do.
You know who else offered solutions? You know who else crucified people? Caesar in Fallout New Vegas. They crucified people. They did it with ropes. They didn't actually nail people's hands through the wood. But they were offering a solution to society. Is that more or less valid than Jesus? I mean, that game actually exists, right? I mean, why is that lore not any better or different than Christian lore? I think it's way more entertaining.
And then I love at the beginning of this when Lennox says it is a matter of fact. It is a matter of, it is evidence-based. I love that he goes there because that's exactly what the ancient church believed. Paul says that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we're the most pitied of all because we've placed our hope in an illusion.
Yeah, you might have done that. Sorry. We have a super chat from Stupid Horror Energy for $2. It says, "Unchanging God can't adapt to world changes." Yeah, I love that username so much. Yeah, that's true. And also, Christians want to say that objective morals exist. Well, they can't. And if they did, then that means that they can't adapt to changing societal conditions. And if that's true, then it's probably evident in the fact that Christians lag so far behind on social issues like gay marriage and trans rights. I mean, it's almost like they've gotten worse over the past few years. Conservative Christians. They revel in it. They revel in the bigotry of being anti-LGBT. They really have just increased their rhetoric to the max. And it's because they have an unchanging book, right? Or, I mean, unless they reinterpret it in a different way, but it's pretty hard to reinterpret some of the stuff that's in Exodus and Leviticus.
But here's the good news today, folks. He did.
This guy's really about to start crying. I'm sorry.
He did rise from the dead, and there is evidence of this in history. And
where? There's no evidence of any person ever coming back to life after dying. Unless you mean on the surgical table and like minutes after dying or being resuscitated, but not days later. That has never happened. There's no evidence of that. That's because it's not just that we haven't physically seen that. It's fundamentally impossible based on the laws of biology. Cells die. You can't unkill the cell. Once it goes through apoptosis, the cells are dead. So, this is what I would like a Christian to explain. So Jesus came back to life. Do you mean his cells came back to life? Did all of his cells come back to life individually? Did he get new cells? What happened to his old cells? Were they replaced? And then you get into the whole ship of Theseus argument. Is that even the same Jesus if his cells are replaced? Whoa. Neo from the Matrix.
There's the type of truth that rings out with beauty as well. And it's filled with goodness as well. It's that Hebrew idea of shalom, where those three pieces are united together: goodness, truth, and beauty. Now, I listened to a debate with this guy named Matt Dillahunty, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, and he said there is no evidence.
Matt Dimmadome. Dimsdale Dimmadome.
There's just claims, but there's no evidence. And I realized through listening through that debate that what he means by evidence is specifically scientific evidence. He wants the type of evidence that you can put under a microscope and say, that's evidence. But that's not the kind of evidence that exists in history. History is a different category of evidence, and the writing of the New Testament is historic in nature, and it is filled with the exact type of evidence that exists all throughout history. So in other words, if you don't accept Jesus...
I'm sorry, I have to stop you there. Do you think that historians and archaeologists don't use scientific methods to verify and understand historic texts and documents? Like, they put documents and artifacts into MRI machines. I hope that's not like saying ATM machine. They'll put them in an MRI. They'll scan them using laser light. They can identify, and they will put this stuff under a microscope. They might do that anyway, because you can compare the fibers of different historical documents to see if they're all part of the same document or if it was something that's stitched together. Or you can compare handwriting in this way too, which is, really important if you're looking at a time period where all documents were written and you want to make sure an original text is written by the same person. You have to compare down to a scientific level the different handwritings. If they might look different, then you want to compare them on that level to make sure that they're the same person. So this is the same arbitrary distinction that Ken Ham made when he debated Bill Nye. There's not a difference between historical science and like microscope science. It's just not a thing.
You are literally throwing out Tiberius Caesar, and really you're throwing out Alexander the Great. You're throwing out like literally all of ancient history. You're throwing out and you're saying we can't know anything. It's all mythology, and you're kind of putting your head under a rock in that context. But if you don't preclude the supernatural possibility that pierced into history in the event of the resurrection, if you don't preclude and say that definitely didn't happen because I don't believe in supernatural explanations to historical events, if you don't start with that premise, and if you just look at it on its own face value and try to solve this historic riddle of we know that Christ was dead at point A, and we know that we know he was alive at point A, we know he was dead at point B, we know he was alive again at point C based on countless eyewitnesses, based on transformed lives, based on Paul attesting to it, James, the brother of Jesus, attesting to it. In other words, there's really, really significant historic reasons to believe that it did happen if you don't preclude the supernatural element. So all that being said, I love what Lennox is talking about here when it comes to the fact that Christianity is a matter of fact, and that is so important. It's not blind faith. Number two, I love the fact that he really highlights the...
I'm sorry. You have to preclude that if you're going to do science. You have to exclude the supernatural if you're going to. Yeah, I mean, it's true. If you want to study something in a scientific context, you have to exclude supernatural events because science is religiously neutral. It can't favor or disfavor one religion or the other. And if you let supernatural explanations into science, you're just opening a whole can of worms where you could use it to explain anything. That's why it's excluded, because there's a quote from Thunderfoot that I like that, I guess God or religion has perfect explanatory power, but it has zero predictive power. So it'll explain everything, but you can't use it to predict anything, which is the cornerstone of doing science. And it's how about not just, oh, they only want scientific evidence. How about any evidence? How about like anything at all? Like, how do you know that he died? Do we have a death certificate for Jesus? And how do you know that he was alive? And how do you know that that's the same person? It could have been a guy that looked like Jesus. It could have been his cousin. You don't know. It could have been David Blaine. This is my other high IQ point. Jesus, I don't begrudge the idea that Jesus existed. If they want to say Jesus existed and he died, I have no problem with that as a historical fact. I'll grant you that. But once you say he resurrected, no. And maybe Jesus did exist, but he was just like the first David Blaine type person. He was just like an awesome magician, and he amazed people on a scale that they wrote about him doing miracles. And I mean, have people ever faked their own death? That's my question. Has somebody ever faked their own death? Do you think maybe if Jesus is trying to build a mythos of his religion, of Christianity, do you think it's possible he would have been motivated to fake his own death? Just saying.
The single most distinctive factor between Christianity and everything else that's on the table, which is that it is not merit-based. Actually, it is merit-based. I'll do a little play on words here. It is merit-based on the work of Jesus. And the offer that God has extended to humanity through the cross of Christ is an offer made available to everyone, regardless of what you've done.
Unless you're gay.
That's the big enchilada, is it's not by works.
The big gay enchilada.
Works of righteousness that we have done, but according to his mercy that he saved us. So the call to action that I have to do at a video like this is look to Jesus. And accept it. Literally accept the gift of salvation that he's made available to you.
Let Jesus come inside you and let him put his yoke on you, and just let Jesus inside of you and just become one with Jesus and become the bride of Christ. Let Jesus come inside of you. I love you, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, I love you, yes I do. Pedostache? I think he's got a nice mustache. I have not proclaimed this guy as a pedostache. A pedostache is usually like very very thin and like when I try to grow a mustache. That would be a pedo stash.
Get yourself plugged into a local church, find some real Christians, and tell them there's something inside of me that longs for union with God. There's this heavenly longing. I believe, like, we all sense at a deep level that we somehow belong to another world. Like, we have longings, we see beauty, and we desire something more than it seems that this world can offer. That is the God-shaped hole that the philosophers have talked about for centuries. And there is a way that we can be with him forever.
Yeah, porn stash is more accurate. That's like a 70s porno stash. Fill the God-shaped hole inside me, Jesus. Come inside me, Jesus.
There is a way. He has made a way. His name is Jesus, and he's done it. And he offers it to us. And so with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think that's probably one of the most beautiful analogies, his cooking analogy, that I've ever heard to explain the difference between Christianity and other religions. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
I found it kind of sexist and gross, personally.
As much as I did. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, I guess we can take a look at another video, if you guys don't mind. Because that went by faster than I actually expected it would. I mean, we're already here, right? Why not? Let me just see what the name of this one is. Hold on. So we have a video of the same guy. Here we go, Oxford. Here we go.
And Richard Dawkins, he shows it, he reveals it in The God Delusion, where he says, and here's one of his main arguments. I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. If you say God created all this, you're going to have to ask who created God. And that's nonsense. And it is nonsense, but not in the way he thought. Because
in the clip that we're about to watch, John Lennox exposes one of...
Do you have nail polish on? No. Oh, okay.
If not the biggest misunderstandings that atheists have about believers and about Christians when it comes to God. And it's so basic, it's so core, but it needs to be addressed, it needs to be underscored, it needs to be highlighted. That's what we're going to do in this video. So with that being said, let's turn to John Lennox. I'll leave a few brief clarifying remarks along the way, mostly let him drive, and then I'll give you guys a ribbon on top at the end. With that being said, let's dive in.
imagine that we think the God of the Bible is a God of the gaps. He's just put...
Oh, I got a comment the other day. I'm sorry, I have to do this. I got a comment the other day that said, like, I get comments saying that I look like an atheist. And I got a comment saying, like, where's his fedora? And I just wanted to say that I finally become a true atheist, like the true Christians. And I have my fedora now. How is this going to work? Is that good? Hold on. You know what? I'm going to have to switch my headphones for this to work.
there to explain until we get a scientific explanation. Then it dawned on me, if you believe that God's like that, you have to choose between God and science.
Yeah.
Why? Because that's the way you've defined God. You've defined God to be a non-explanation waiting for science to come along. So of course you have to choose. The God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps. And I often say to people, have you ever read the first line of the Bible? It goes like this. In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't yet understand. And they all laugh, as you do, politely, thank you very much. That's nonsense. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which is grammatically a merism. Everything he created. The bits you do understand.
Okay, from Abdullah, we have a super chat for, I forget what the currency is, but it's just a cowboy emoji. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you, everybody who sent donations. I really appreciate that.
And the bits you don't. Moreover, think about ordinary life. The more I understand about art, the more I admire the genius of a Rembrandt, not the less. the more I understand of engineering, the more I admire the genius of a Henry Ford, not the less. And going up to the universe, the more I understand of the universe, the more I admire. This is Newton, the God who did it that way.
They are making it sound as though it's a zero-sum game, and we explain things and explain things and explain things, and the more we explain things, the more we push out God. Because they believe in a finite universe, and they believe that that's all there is, they have this worldview in a sense. And the God of the Bible is infinite, is eternal. In other words, these are ideas that are incompatible with a material worldview. I'm saying too much in it, so feel free to respond or not respond. But it strikes me as you're talking about this that I just hadn't thought of that before, that they have a very, very limited zero.
I literally don't think there's any way for me to wear this with my headphones on. Like, it's not going to work. Oh, they're too big. Oh, wait. No. No. Dang. I'm gonna have to get my smaller headphones.
Some game view of the universe.
Well, that's true, but what we're saying here is that they do not understand the biblical concept of God. See, Richard Dawkins, he says in one of his books that you've got scientific explanation, you've got the God explanation. They're both scientific type explanations.
Right.
That, to my mind, is profound misunderstanding. The God explanation is not even in the same category as the scientific explanation, and I'm going to move to that. And I said to him, much to his irritation, actually,
When I give my outro at the end, I will wear the hat.
on one occasion, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. You know, you're tilting at a windmill, you see. And Richard Dawkins, he shows it, he reveals it in The God Delusion, where he says, and here's one of his main arguments, I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. If you say God created all this, you're going to have to ask who created God. And that's nonsense. And it is nonsense, but not in the way he thought. Because if you ask who created God, you're assuming God is created. Well, I don't believe in a created God. We usually call them idols, and we don't need Dawkins to tell us they don't exist.
By saying you're assuming God is created, you're assuming that God exists. So atheists have no concept of a God one way or the other. We just have your description of him, but substitute the word created. It's a question that Christians can't answer because there is no answer. It's like, well, where did your God originate from? I mean, but he's just going to focus on the word created.
You see, he's not addressing even the question if there's an eternal God. The Bible claims God is eternal. He's not created. So his question doesn't even apply, as I pointed out to him in that debate. But then I got the sting in the tail. I said, you believe the universe created you, don't you? So let me ask you your question, which you think is valid. Who created your creator?
You're making it a fallacious argument by framing it as who. Just saying who created you, who created your universe. There's no who. And how is the universe formed is a question where the atheists have a pretty good answer. And it's an answer where because most atheists tend to side with cosmology and the sciences. They tend to agree with what the science says, which is the Big Bang Theory. Christians just have this same explanation that they've had for hundreds of years. So it's just throwing someone's question back at them is a pretty lame debate tactic.
I'm still waiting for an answer, and that's 10 years ago.
Don't you see how that logic works against itself. The real question is this, and I'll say this briefly and then get back to Linux, but in order for there to be anything, which obviously there is existence, there is reality. Not only that, there's a complex, beautiful reality where we can have conversations like this across YouTube and where we are a species capable of thought at the level that is taking place in this video. But in order for there to be even anything, something must be eternal. The question is,
Why? How can you demonstrate that? Why does there have to be something eternal for anything to exist?
what is that uncaused, eternal thing? We're going to get into that on the back end of this video a little bit more, but for now, let's get back to Linux.
If God created something, who created God? But that's still inside the creation.
But it's actually logically very silly. I mean, I used to get it in Russia, and it used to be very funny. They'd ask me this question, or children would ask it in Britain. I never heard it from professors.
Well, sometimes children ask very astute questions. I mean, children, they don't have any type of social understanding to say things a certain way. Sometimes they can be very blunt, and they'll ask very simple but sometimes very hard to answer questions because they understand things on a very base level. In a way, that they've kind of got their own logic, which is pretty solid in a way. But discounting a question because it was asked by a child, would Jesus do that? I don't think that he would. I don't think that he would. Think on that. Think on that.
But in Russia, they'd say this, and I'd say to them, these were the old days, you know, when I used to go. They'd tell me, I'd say, what do you believe about the universe? They'd say it's eternal. Oh, I said, isn't that interesting? You believe in an eternal universe, and yet your question, who created God, shows you cannot conceive of an eternal God. Why is that?
What do you mean cannot conceive of an eternal God? It's just not, they don't believe that there's an eternal God. Some people think the universe is eternal. Not everybody who's an atheist or a scientist thinks that.
How can you conceive of an eternal universe, not an eternal God? It's just totally inconsistent.
How? How is it inconsistent?
I said, your problem is you can't even think there might be an eternal reality that is a person, you see. But
I think that is inconsistent. That is ridiculous. Because it's just, it doesn't make sense. How could there be an eternal reality that is a person? And it wouldn't be a person anyway. Not in our understanding of what a person is.
it is a very silly objection, and to find it at the heart of his book. But I want to go back to the second main reason. I said Hawking and Dawkins' problem is,
Did this guy debate Richard Dawkins? Can somebody in chat look that up? Because I feel like he was saying that this was something from an argument that Dawkins was making in his book, and then he started framing it as if he had asked Dawkins a question in a debate, and 10 years later I'm still waiting for an answer, as if like he owes you his time to answer your fallacious question. But if somebody could Google that, I would appreciate it.
they're dealing with the wrong concept of God by pitching God against science as an explanation. But now move to the science, and you can very easily see why Dawkins and the rest of them are completely wrong in suggesting God is the same kind of an explanation and therefore in competition with a scientific explanation. Very simple illustration. Why is the water boiling? Well, it's boiling because you've got heat energy from a gas flame.
Actually, water can boil if you increase the pressure. It can boil at room temperature. So you're wrong, actually.
Being conducted through the bottom of a good Irish copper kettle and
Why's it got to be Irish, bro? Why you hating?
agitating the molecules of water. That's why it's boiling. Is it? It's boiling because I want a cup of tea.
I hated that so much. Jeez, I hated that. Is that the end of the video?
People snigger at that and so on. Right?
What did he say? Oh, snicker. Oh, okay. We're gonna have to cancel this guy.
Rightly so, because they
So he debated Hitchens. Jeez, that Ripperino he probably got cancer from that debate.
See, I'm being foolish. That the explanation in terms of heat energy, the scientific explanation, doesn't compete with the personal explanation of my desire for a cup of tea.
Or your desire for God to exist.
In other words, both are correct.
Both are correct.
And you do not have to
Both are erect.
push one away and say this is
No.
the correct one. Both are.
It's
Both are erect. You don't have to push one away. I'm losing interest.
as if
after
to
erect.
say, because I can explain this in terms of heat equations and physics, John Lennox doesn't exist. I mean, that is the level of the argument at the moment.
I actually remember in grade school getting this materialistic worldview pushed on us. People would say, a teacher would say, you're made of chemicals, and if I were to reduce those chemicals and sell them, you're worth about $2.86. This is in the
gone up a bit,
in the
but
70s.
anyway.
In the 70s, yeah.
You're
but the
worth
po-
a bit more, Eric, in case you're
Thank
feeling
you.
inferior.
Yeah, now I'm
You're
worth about
a bit
$7 or
more.
$8. But the thing is that very idea is itself a lie. In other words, that a human being could be reduced to
That's right.
chemicals. I
This
am
is-
chemicals.
but you're
I'm more than chemicals.
That's right.
I'm both.
This is reductionism again.
Yeah.
Do you mean it's a lie because you couldn't physically do that? I mean, the only way to really reduce a human like that would be to set them on fire, and that wouldn't reduce them to their base elements. No, but it is true that you're made of chemicals. So what was even the point of him saying that? I don't understand it. His point.
Now, go back to my illustration. Even kids can see it.
Yeah.
I tell kids in school, you know, they're 10 or 11, and I say to them, look, here's a Ford Galaxy engine motor in an automobile. Now, I want to give you two explanations for that. One is automobile engineering and physics. The other is Henry Ford. Tell me which explanation is true. But, sir, you need both. They've got it. Why cannot some of these high-powered professors see that?
You literally, you just a few moments ago said, oh, this argument that Dawkins makes, children used to ask it to me. Like you were discounting the question because children asked it to you. Now you're saying, oh, even children understand this. Like they have some sort of base logic and reason, but you just denigrated children a second ago. So like, which is it?
The
They're
way I
simply uncomfortable with the idea of God. I think they'll do anything to shy away from it because it really would blow their world to smithereens.
It does.
And they are frightened. And I think that they're, as I hear you talk, it strikes me that they and their ilk are on the run because science increasingly makes the case for God. The more
No. The more scientifically knowledgeable our society has become, the more secular it has become. You can't deny that.
science we know,
I mean, you could say that's correlation doesn't equal causation, but I mean, I think that there are definite links that you could point to between those two things.
this is the irony, and I think that this wouldn't have been true 100 years ago, and so that worldview has carried on and on through the decades, but that the science of the last 40 or 50 years points us more and more to believe that there's a God, and I think that they're willfully ignorant of that, because to acknowledge, we haven't talked about the fine-tuned universe, but you couldn't know most of what we know about the fine-tuned universe 50 years ago.
Please don't.
And the more we know about the universe, the more uncomfortable it makes someone who says, oh, there are plenty of planets out there with life on them, and it's inevitable that life will evolve.
Well, let's
And-
come
Who says that? What scientist says that? None. Zero.
to that in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The bottom line for the argument
I'm really getting tired of looking at this man's lip. I have to just say that.
I've just given is this.
Like, put some lipstick on or something at that point. Like, just make it an even color.
And anybody can use this argument. I'm always
I'm imagining this man in drag now.
looking. C.S. Lewis taught me this. If you can't explain your faith in God in words that people can understand, either you don't believe it or you don't understand it. That's the big slogan in front of my mind. Help people understand. Here's the bottom line. God no more competes with science as explanation of the universe, then Henry Ford competes with the law of internal combustion as an explanation for the motor car engine. Anybody can understand that. We are used in life of having multi-level explanations. And the irony about the kettle boiling thing is that people have been drinking and enjoying tea for thousands of years before they understood about heat equations. It's the personal explanation, the agent explanation, that is usually the more important.
Whether you're talking about an architect in a building, an author in a book,
This dude literally has the "What would Jesus do" bracelet on.
a chef and his recipe, a musician and his composition, a gardener and his garden, and there's many more examples that we could give. The point is that if you look inside of the created thing for the creator, you're asking for a kind of evidence that is just simply categorically wrong. It would be so silly to say, I don't see any metal here in the shape of an architect, and therefore there's no architect for this building. I don't see any letters here, any ink on this page that revealed that there's an author, therefore there's no author to this book. I don't see any chef made out of noodles and sauce, so therefore there's no chef responsible for this recipe.
I don't see any chef made out of noodles or sauce. Therefore, there's no chef for this recipe.
I don't see anything in the treble clef or the bass clef in the shape of the musician, and therefore there's no composer of this composition. And lastly, I don't see any gardener in the shape of a potato or a vegetable, and therefore there's no gardener responsible for this garden. Do you see the fundamental fallacy in looking for the source for something in the shape of, or in the design of, or within the parameters of the created thing? This is the same mistake that is commonly made when people ask for and insist for evidence of God. The creator, the designer, the architect is not going to be made up of the thing that he has created. And it's the exact same thing of the
How do you know? How do you know that?
God of the universe. But rather what you do is you look at design, beauty, intelligence, language, functionality, and you infer using logic to understand that all of these things are pointing to something outside of the system. And it's exactly the same thing with the universe itself. When you look at human rights, when you look at morality, when you look at
Human rights.
human consciousness, the intelligibility of the universe with the human brain, when you look at all of these things working together, you understand that through inference, it is fully rational, in fact, far more rational, to see that there is a mind behind this, in the same way that there's a mind behind any of the rest of these analogies that have been given. So with this being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video.
Okay. All right. Finally. All right. So that was a long video. And I just want to start off by saying, first thing, rights for transgender people. I just want to say that off the cuff. But these two videos, I think they really show just a fundamental misunderstanding of argumentation by these Christians. Like this channel, the last video, the video I just showed had 250,000 views. Like who is watching these videos? Somebody is finding these arguments convincing, even though they're just trotting out the same arguments that have been put out before. They're just retreading the same logical fallacies as they've been for the past 20 years. But apparently it's convincing to a new group of Christians or people who are on the fence. And I think that that's kind of unfortunate, you know? And I think you really see the smugness in the attitude of this Michael Lennox guy. Like, I mean, just look at Brandon, the guy who makes this channel. He was like moved by these arguments, like this crappy like story about a cookbook that he got when he asked his wife to marry him. And I found the story like very creepy. I did not find it endearing. It didn't make me want to cry, maybe out of like fear, because this man is so villainous. But maybe that's just how I see him. But I'm glad to be back. I'm hoping to come back with a new stream for y'all. I've gotten a few questions about my next debate, and as of now, I believe Kent Hovind has accepted my debate topic, because the debate is the topic I was trying to put forward was, does carbon dating disprove a young Earth? The idea being that if carbon dating is accurate, then if we have things that are dated as being older than 10,000 years or just older than 6,000 years, then that in itself would disprove a young Earth. And Kent Hovind says himself that, oh, if you have one thing that disproves an argument, then that it's invalid. Or if you have one piece of evidence that proves him innocent, he's innocent in a court of law, in a court of Hovind. So Donnie said that, because Donnie asked me, he said that he's having like a creation seminar or conference or whatever, which is really just coming out with a bunch of YouTube videos on his channel. And he said at the end of it, he wanted to see if I would do a debate with Kent again. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, because I kind of been wanting to do it anyway. Although I'm kind of having some second thoughts, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I agreed to it, and now he's saying, like, first he said that Kent accepted, and now he's saying, like, oh, we can do it, but would you want to do it on like December 20th or 22nd? And I'm like, why are you pushing the date back? Like, I've been preparing for this debate thinking it was going to be on this date, and like all of a sudden you want to push it back. I don't know why. Part of me, when I watch the last video I made about Kent, though, I kind of don't want to debate him, because some of the stuff he said about me in that video was just so like kind of rude and nasty that part of me is just kind of like, fuck this guy. But at the same time, that also kind of makes me want to like humiliate him in a debate even more, because I think I have a good strategy this time. I won't talk about it publicly, but it's not that deep. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, a little bit of a different take. And you know, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We're at right about 8,500 subs, which is cool, because you know, then we're going to be creeping up on 9,000, which is then going to be closer to 10,000, which is crazy that I'm even close to that. So yeah, definitely sub to the channel and share the videos if you haven't. Like, if you can, share the video with somebody who you think might enjoy it. You know, that would really help my channel out, because I'm trying to grow. You know, I'm trying to blow up like Gutsick Gibbon. She has like 50,000 subscribers. It's crazy. That's crazy. I want that many. No, I'm just kidding. I would like to earn them. So share the videos. Share them with your enemies. But yeah, check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel, and check out the channel memberships if you want to support monetarily. And